Do you want to support this podcast and earn 4.5 PDUs toward your PMI certification? If so, you can go to projectmanagementforyou.com. Again, projectmanagementforyou.com, where you can get my book, Project Management for You, How to Turn Your Ideas into Reality, Deliver on Your Promises, and Get Things Done for just $5.99. This includes the audiobook and the ebook versions of the book. So if you like podcasts, if you're listening to this right now in your car, it's a great opportunity. You can just listen to the book in audio format and earn the 4.5 PDUs. This is for less than $6, and this is Canadian dollars. So, depending on the conversion rate for you, it's even less than that. So if you are a PMP and read or listen to this book, you can also claim 4.5 PDUs towards your certification. To buy it and help support this podcast, go to projectmanagementforyou.com. Again, projectmanagementforyou.com. If you enjoyed this show, this is the best way you can support it. Thank you.
Project managers, have you ever felt like you should get that promotion or a better job? Start a business, write that book. Have you ever felt you were made for more but didn't know where to start?
Welcome to the PM for the Masses podcast with your host, Cesar Abeid.
Learn from the experts, think outside the box, have a voice, network, and be extraordinary.
PM for the Masses podcast.
Well, hello everybody and welcome. I'm Cesar Abeid, your host, and this show is your regular reminder that your career matters more than your job and that your life is a project and you are the manager. Whether you work for a company or for yourself, your job stability is really just your ability to land your next gig. So, join me in practicing intentional, planned, and value-adding relevance, starting right now. For a while now, I've been very interested in product and product management. Maybe it's because of the nature of my current job right now, that I never really had to think about it, about product and product management and how it relates to project management. But as I learned more about this topic, I've been reading books and listening to other podcasts and reading articles. I see that it is really a field in which project managers can grow into as we all try to, keep exploring the progression of our careers. I think that there's a natural connection between project management and product management. So when I came across a book called Project to Product and started reading it, I knew I had to invite the author to come and talk to us. I mean, I wasn't even done with the first chapter. I said, I need to have this guy over. So without any further ado, let's get started.
Special guest coming up next. PMforthemasses.com. PMforthemasses.com.
Today, I bring you my conversation with Dr. Mik Kersten. He's the author of Project to Product, How to Survive and Thrive in the Age of Digital Disruption with a Flow Framework. We're going to talk about that. I read that book and I was like, I have to have this guy on the podcast. The book is just that good. Dr. Mik Kersten started his career as a research scientist at Xerox PARC, where he created the first aspect-oriented development environment. He then pioneered the integration of development tools with Agile and DevOps as part of his computer science PhD at the University of British Columbia. So a fellow Canadian here on the line. Founding TaskTop out of that research, Mik has written over 1 million lines of open source code that is still in use today. And he has brought 7 successful open source and commercial products to market. His experiences working with some of the largest digital transformations in the world has led him to identify the critical disconnect between business leaders and technologists. Since that time, Mik has been working on creating new tools and a new framework for connecting software value stream networks, and we'll talk about that during the call, and enabling the shift from project to product. And Dr. Kersten is on the line with me today from beautiful British Columbia, Canada. I'm assuming you're there. Are you there?
I am. I've not been here much lately for reasons we can touch on in the interview, but yes, I'm very happy to be here today.
All right, Cesar. Go Canada.
Yes.
So thanks for being here today. And just as we were about to record here, I was just sharing with you a little bit of a background on the PM for the Masses podcast and where I come from. And so when reading your book, the first thing that came to mind is for going from project to product sounds like a very interesting, maybe a career move for someone in project management, especially the case that you make there in the book that this is really the future. So you really make a case there for the shift from project to a product mindset. So maybe we should start from the beginning. How would you define product or product management?
Yes. So I think the book takes this very, very strong stance on what's happened with applying what I actually personally think is a great discipline that's really important for solving really interesting problems, and how it's been misapplied to innovating as a software organization. And it actually goes as far as saying that it's project management is the wrong operating and steering model for driving value to customers through software. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that project management, I think I'm going to just go straight, if you don't mind, Cesar, I'm going to go kind of straight to the conceptual core of why I think that is and the kinds of evidence that the book presents. Cool. So have you ever heard of the Cynefin framework?
No.
Okay, so it's spelled Cynefin. It's actually, I think, worth our listeners taking a quick look at. But it breaks down different domains of complexity. So there are obvious problems that we solve, like things we can really process and encode in a very simple document. They're complicated problems that we solve. They're also complex problems that we solve, and they're chaotic ones. And what's so interesting is if we have something that's actually a complicated problem, like making a new kind of bridge, it's using very well understood principles. It's actually a highly repeatable kind of problem. It's something we can really decompose into a series of steps, making the Burj Khalifa, the world's biggest buildings. In the Cynefin framework, these are actually not complex or chaotic problems because we know how to decompose them into these repeatable steps. And so what I realized through kind of doing the research for project to product is project management is great for when we can decompose work into steps, activities, associate budgets and milestones and deadlines to those activities. But something else is happening in software. And there's some reason why software innovators don't actually apply project management as the main way that they manage their software delivery. But they apply something very different. And that different thing is what I've started calling this product-oriented value stream, so value stream management. But at the root of that is the fact that software delivery, because we're still, and the book makes this fairly strong case of why this is happening given where we are in the maturity of software delivery, but is at best a complex endeavor, which means when we start on this endeavor, we don't even know what the result's going to be. And we want to maximize not for repeatability, but we want to maximize for learning. And we don't want to bake in the risk at the very front end of the project because we don't even know what the risk profile is. When you're an organization who wants to bring to market a great new mobile experience, you don't know what competitors you'll be up against in 3 or 6 months because the market is so dynamic and changing so quickly, and because the technology stacks are also changing so quickly. Mm-hmm. So really at the bottom, at the core of this, and I can sort of talk some about what's different about this project-oriented management approach and product-oriented management approach, is that we don't, in these complex and chaotic problems, we don't know what the steps are. What we have to actually do is create this dynamic learning system where we can take feedback from, okay, doing this got us a few more active users. Let's invest more in this application, or drove a few more dollars, and actually create this fast iterating feedback loop to determine what to do next. Because upfront, anyone who thinks they can create a 2-year project plan for launching any kind of new interesting offering is just dead wrong. They have no idea how the market or the technology landscape is going to change in the meantime. Mm-hmm. So again, project management is incredible for creating and I'll now change it to the analogy of manufacturing. if a car manufacturer's setting up a new plant, that's a great project, right? They're building that new plant. And it's actually very clear the steps that are needed. You need to make the building, buy the robots, then create the assembly line, all those sorts of things. It's a well understood problem you can decompose into a series of steps and track how you're doing on those steps to some deadline and where you are in relation with budgets and resources. So you're actually able to, using project management, completely optimize how effectively you can do that. If that plant needs to now respond to changing markets, and the example that the book, Project to Product, gives is when BMW made the plant that produces the i3 and i8 electric cars, they could not have known what the demand for the i3 would be. But because they take a product-oriented approach and focus on the value stream, as they learned from the market over the years after having built the plant, they'll actually change that value stream. They'll decide to, and they have decided, due to the success of the i3, to actually produce way more i3s out of that Leipzig plant that the book walks through in its narrative. So they've taken a product-oriented approach to delivering cars, even while they have a project-oriented approach to creating a new plant, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, and I recommend everybody read the book because you go into a lot of detail about how that's done. And you also mentioned, especially at the beginning of the book, that what's happening too is that companies that started out as software-only companies, using these approaches that are more product oriented, as they grow, eventually some of them are actually getting into the traditional manufacturing, physical product type of business, like Amazon, for example, and they're just using that the product approach to that and just crushing everybody, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's because, and it's interesting. It's the same. It's the companies who've grown in the new way, the new manufacturing method, right? Mm-hmm. Where the companies have been born in that. So the companies who are born since the start of the age of software, since the 1970s, they've been able to master this, and the way that they manage their business is well aligned to software value streams, just to product innovation through software. Whereas what you see out there, of course, is a lot of businesses who've been around much longer. And so they're using these project management principles for managing their software and their IT budgets because those are the only ones they have. And that's where things are falling down. It's not that you stop doing project management. It's not that you get rid of the PMO or the EPMO. It's just that you know when to apply it and when not to apply it. And and of course, you'll actually even have projects in software, right? If you're ramping up a new team, you're bringing new things to market, there'll be projects associated with that. But your primary steering model for innovating in software is about flow and incremental measurement, not about and frequent measurement of business results. And it's not about baking risk up front or setting 2-year budgets.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's if folks who are into project management and what's been happening in the last few years, if folks are listening right now, they're thinking agile, right? So how is this not agile? Because
Yeah. So yes, exactly, agile. And I think we've had a decade now of agile project management. And agile, I think I've been a big believer in agile. I've been doing it since in terms of my own organizations and teams, since Ken Beck released the Extreme Programming book, which I think was one of the initial great summaries of why this kind of iterative development is important and what are the practices around it. So fundamentally, this is about agile and lean. However, when we look at the way that agile has evolved, and now it's kin DevOps, which is sort of the more tool automation oriented way of looking at how you actually build and release software and deploy software. Agile within most organizations has, for better or actually not for better or worse, for worse, really been contained to the software development teams. And around that agile process, there's a project management process. And if that's the case, what's happening is development's being agile, but the business is not. And the way that you're connecting your strategy to what you're delivering is not. So I call this in the book, and because in the end, what we really care about in terms of making our organizations deliver great things is optimizing the end-to-end process. And this idea of actually making the development team go with agile project management without changing the way you look at the end-to-end delivery is what I call a local optimization of the value stream. Mm-hmm. It's what Nokia did to make their development as agile as they could, not realizing and investing very heavily in agile development, not realizing that nothing really changed on the business side. So just because the middle of the value stream was agile, it didn't mean any more business value went to customers. And this is really where we need to look again at the initial inspirations for agile, so lean manufacturing, which was all about the end-to-end flow of value to the customer. Mm-hmm. So with that background, the question I was asking myself is like, and Agile's working fine in many organizations, right? Especially smaller mid-sized organizations and the ones that have grown up around software, because they tend to have, whether they have more technical leaders, whether it's just at smaller scales, it's just a simpler problem, right? So many organizations are succeeding fine with Agile in the small scale. The issue comes when you've got a larger organization and everything upstream of the development team is not agile, and often everything downstream of the development team is not agile. So really, I asked myself, well, how is it possible that with all this, all these decades of lean literature, and now a decade of great thought leadership and approaches and things like scaled agile frameworks and other frameworks like LESS or Nexus and Scrum and so on, why haven't we figured this out? Those thought leaders in Agile have actually been saying all the right things. Why are organizations having so much trouble with this? And I realized that, at a business level, the kind of simplicity and maturity we have in project management, where you can actually connect to strategy, to finances, you've got this notion of deadlines and milestones and costs and resources. We don't have the equivalent of that in Agile as a common language, a common framework where that the business people and the people doing Agile development are speaking. And that led me to realize that the scaling frameworks for Agile, things like SAFe, they're amazing at providing, because they have such rich taxonomies, right? You look at Scale Agile framework, there are dozens of types of work items, which is great because for those different specialists doing the work, they actually need that level of granularity. But for a business person, if you start talking about enablers and architecture stories and you start talking about story points, you're no longer speaking a language that's meaningful to the business. And that's where project management always did well. It always spoke a language that was meaningful to the business, whether you're making a bridge or a data center or a marketing campaign. Mm-hmm. So the question for me was, well, how do we get this goodness of Agile and DevOps and put a layer over it that is meaningful to the business, but that stays true to the concepts of customers pull and value streams, product value streams. And that really was where I had countless conversations, both with thought leaders, but really mostly with customers trying to do this, trying to scale Agile, and came up with the 4 flow items as the equivalent of the cars that flow through manufacturing value streams, as the thing that define value for how you deliver software. And the flow framework really became around measuring the end-to-end flow of those 4 flow items, coming up with 4 flow metrics, and providing the organization with this way of measuring both flow metrics and business results through each of the product value streams, through each thing that you're delivering internally or externally as software. So it's really trying to create that flow-oriented, but much, much simpler and more business-oriented way of measuring what the Agile teams were actually doing, but not just the Agile teams, right? Because the design, it's really important to measure how long it takes to design a feature, how long it takes to do user experience work, how long it takes to test work, or how much overhead there's from supporting. So really, I guess this is the other thing I should emphasize, and one of the other main the key differences and inspirations on the flow framework, which is that it assumes that software has become, and this is back to the Kniffen framework, so complex and in many places so chaotic that the only way for organizations to get a handle on it is to have a very high degree of specialization, so that the software value stream involve all these specialists. It used to be just developers. Now it's a lot more than developers. And that Agile wasn't enough because we had to measure the flow across a very large number of specialists. Support desk people work very differently than testers, as an example. And we actually have to measure that end-to-end flow across every tool and across every specialization.
Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you about value streams and flow, because that might not be something that folks listening are familiar with. But before I ask you that, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think a lot of it has to do with scale as well. For example, you mentioned the building of a bridge or the Burj Khalifa as being a maybe a textbook example of a waterfall or project. But in a way, it is like a feature in a larger product, which is like urban planning, for example. So, the bridge might be like a simple end-to-end like waterfall project, but the decision to build that bridge and how many lanes it should have and whether or not there should be a toll booth on it, that those decisions were already made. Hopefully, taking the business case into account. It just so happens that that product, which is the planning of that urban area, it just takes decades to complete, and people don't seem to care that much because you might not be around when that product is finally delivered. But in a smaller scale, software would be just like the urban planning, and in which the bridge is a feature, right? And within that context, maybe we should use Agile, even waterfall for that matter. But that part is just like one component of the entire product. Am I on the ballpark?
Well, that's really interesting. To be honest, I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think that's a really interesting. I think it's a telling example where, building. So you should not have any surprises by the time you finish building the bridge, right? You want to minimize the surprises. You want to minimize how much you learn while building the world's tallest building.
Right.
So you want to bake in all contingencies up front. You have to have your entire supply chain instead of contractors. Everything has to be dialed in. Of course, you'll have some surprises, but your whole goal is minimizing variability and surprises. But that's a really great point you make. When we actually look at a city that's grown organically, it is much more like this flow orientation than the book talks about. Because in the end, and by the way, one of my inspirations early on, because in software, one of the most successful in software architecture, where my background is, one of the most successful books was written by one of my PhD supervisors, Eric Gama. It's called Design Patterns. And it's just about basic software architecture patterns. Now, where he drew his inspiration from was Christopher Alexander's book on patterns, which actually had to do with urban planning and things like, you want happier people and more thriving commercial center. Well, you should have a town square where there isn't car traffic or other kind of traffic, because that breeds social spaces and commerce, right? Something that Europe got right that somehow got largely forgotten in the US. So, and Canada, where we are, Cesar.
Right.
And now is maybe slowly starting to be learned. So I think that's a really interesting example, because if you actually take a result, and that's what the flow framework is about measuring results. If you measure things to a result where the result is, I want a thriving, lively downtown center with X dollars of commerce. So I've got very happy retailers there, which is then helping it thrive even further. Now what you've done is something like what the flow framework says you do in software, which is you've had made a bunch of projects to shut down one street. Maybe you experiment with shutting down. They're doing this a bit in Vancouver now, shutting down a street on weekends or something of that sort. But what you're really after is not an upfront, well-defined plan. You're after a result, which is thriving downtown center. And I think that conceptually really is what the flow framework and what software innovation is about. You're learning, And in order to learn, you basically need you need a feedback mechanism. You need a way of implementing the things you want to learn from. So, basically creating as you said, the features. So this might be buildings or bridges or road closures or whatever it might be. And then once you learn, you decide, okay, this is working. Let's double down on this. And that's really what product development's about.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. And it's almost like, you integrate a function, right? Like now we're looking at it from a different perspective, still the same kind of numbers, but so in which the small projects are the features, but I think you also make a case that the common language around, we need to be able to integrate everything so we can do this value stream game. Like, can you explain to the audience what the value stream is?
Sure. And I just want to touch on one more thing, is because back to I think this is a really interesting example I want to think about more as well, but a city is a chaotic system, right? You can't tell me what building will be in 5 years, right? Things could have happened where something got torn down or put up and so on. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit with buildings because they do last a bit longer. In Vancouver, they don't, though. They turn them down constantly. So we've got a chaotic system, and I think this was the brilliance of Christopher Alexander's work on patterns in building and in cities, is that this patterns, this common vocabulary of patterns, lets us understand and work with that complexity. And really, that is and same, by the way, with project management as well. It helps us work with a different kind of complexity, just one where there's more certainty going forward. But again, building a space shuttle or a bridge, that's crazy complexity, right? So it's just better understood. So the key thing I was after is introducing this common vocabulary, right? So that everyone in a software organization understands what a product is and defines their product model. And it's, shockingly, this is not understood in organizations that have, because I speak to these organizations multiple times a week and helping them make these transformations with my, what I do and my company TaskTop. Most organizations, they'll have large organizations like, Fortune 200, they'll have thousands of applications. They don't have their product portfolio defined. Kind of the opposite of what you think of a software company like a Microsoft, who's got a perfectly well-defined product portfolio, or a Google. So to have a common definition of a product is, what an internal product is, what a developer product is, which is often supported through things like application programming interfaces or APIs, what an external facing product is, what a value stream is, the fact that a value stream starts and ends with a customer. Right? It's not a value stream if you're measuring it from development to deployment. It's only a value stream if you're measuring it from when customer requests come in, as we learned from manufacturing. And then, so just now to answer your question, a value stream is all the activities needed to deliver value to a customer.
Okay. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and those value streams need to be defined by product, because value streams by their nature have to be defined by customer pull. So what a customer wants, whatever app that your company's making, they want on their screen, that's a product, right? That product might have backend services and a whole bunch of other things going into it. But the really key thing about the flow framework is that you make that product value stream a first-class thing in your organization. You know exactly which teams are on it. You only ever assign a person to one product value stream. Kind of the opposite of what organizations do with project management, where they're assigning developers to 10 different projects, which makes them thrash on every single one and get very little done, right? A success pattern we've noticed with the flow framework is a developer and a team, even a team, is only ever assigned to one product value stream, because software is so complex, they need time to master that product value stream and all the software that's in there and the other complexities. So you make these product value streams a first-class part of your organization, and they're a bigger thing than what's coming out of Agile, right? They're not just a feature team, they're not a cross-functional team. They're actually composed of multiple teams, and they might have different specialists, and different one of your products might involve different specialists. One might be very infrastructure heavy. One might be very user experience heavy and need a ton of graphic designers on it. And then you measure costs and results for each product value stream. And you make your investment decisions and your budgets around those product value streams. So, and I mean, the really great thing is you then have a direct mapping of, well, we increase the flow by adding more developers and testers and operations people to this product value stream. And guess what? Our customers were happier. Let's invest some more there. Or guess what? We actually delivered way more features by doing these things. Let's keep doing that. Or this particular software architecture is a dead end. It's no matter what we put into it, we don't get much more out. Let's start to replatform.
Just to make it a bit more concrete for those listening, I don't know how far we can stretch that metaphor of the city, but what would be an example in the context of a city of a value stream path? What would that look like?
So first of all, I think I have never had that thought till this interview that a city actually exhibits these kinds of flow concepts. But let's try it. Okay. So yeah, in the end, this analogy could well break down. I'm just going to warn you now. But in the end, these product value streams are about measuring outcomes, which is in the end a benefit to a customer. So I think you could conceptualize a value stream of downtown commerce, right? Downtown retail.
Okay.
And you would define that value stream as basically all of these streets and how we look at all these streets. You define results for it, which is we want this many retail stores to be opening and to be serving customers. We want this much foot traffic. And then we're going to invest in people who really understand how to do that, right? How to make lively sidewalk spaces, how to do all the things that we want for a thriving downtown. So maybe you add a school and so on, but you've got this value stream. You've got this very complex city, but you're looking at one value stream of the city because another value stream might be just commuters getting people to work. Mm-hmm. And you could treat these two things potentially as two separate value streams with two different sets of business, what the flow framework calls business outcomes defined. And you would, again, invest and measure them accordingly. But you would do that in this flow orientation by experimenting and learning rather than pretending upfront that you can make the perfect plan, right? And you'll have to, by the way, the key thing in software where this analogy might actually hold is value streams have dependencies between them, right? So of course, if you've got a main route going through your downtown, well, these two value streams might interfere. And fundamentally, I think one of the main things the flow framework indicates is those dependencies and intersections between value streams are what's so hard to manage. And that's really where you need to have a bigger picture strategy of how you address those. So I think it's a kind of a fuzzy analogy, but I think it's similar in the sense that it's about flow and measurement, not about upfront planning.
Great. No, that makes sense. And I'm finally kind of getting that because the book goes into a lot of detail there. It talks about the flow framework, but I personally, right, I haven't really worked in a team that actually is developing software. I mean, I work for a company that is a software company, but I'm more in the customer service side of things with the projects there. So that to me was like is making a lot more sense. So thank you for that. You compare, we're coming up here to 30 minutes, but I just wanted to bring up the comparison that you make between Boeing and BMW there on your, was it Boeing? I think it was Boeing.
Yeah, that's right.
So can you talk a little bit about those two?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, both of these companies have mastered at just incredible and impressive scale how to deliver more flow through the value of either airplanes or cars to their customers. And they measure everything that they measure. So let's just take BMW is all about flow. That Leipzig plant delivers a new car every 70 seconds. And so everything is looked at how to deliver that car that provides sheer driving pleasure to the customer and what interruptions there are in that flow. So It's much more about the quality, the speed with which those cars flow to the customer and making everything work around that than it is about measuring any point in the step. And I think that one of the most important lessons from that is the car manufacturers, they focus so much on the flow time through that factory, right? So they care about lead time, how long it takes from customer order to customer receiving car. And the automotive manufacturers who have the shortest lead time tend to have the best revenue results. They tend to be the best companies. And of course, within the plant, all they care about is how long it takes the car to make it through the plant and remove any interruptions and bottlenecks from that. And so that's where we really need to take our inspiration for flow orientations, because that's what lean is about, is making value flow without interruptions. And to do that, you always have to be looking end to end rather than at one particular silo. Is how long is testing taking? How long, again, the waterfall steps. You don't look at the waterfall steps. You look at the end to end, and then you dig in to fix something that might be wrong with one of the steps. Right. Once you've actually looked end to end, measured end to end, and said, okay, my bottleneck is right here. And if you don't do that, then you could be optimizing the wrong thing. And that, again, where the theory of constraints is such a critical body of knowledge, because it tells us if we're not focused on the constraint, we're wasting our time.
Right. That makes sense. And I think also a good example of how, in manufacturing, like for car manufacturing, for example, they get really good at that lead time, from order to delivery. But they historically, they tend to really fail when the market shifts, right? Like in the 80s, so in the 70s with the emissions and all that, and how, the American manufacturers really struggle with that. And now with the electric power, and I think the great example of BMW that you share is that it's slowly becoming a software company, and it's built in a way now that reacts to what consumers want, and they're able to think on their feet, and it even like physically change the plant based on demand. That's amazing. It was amazing.
It's incredible they can do it, and it's exactly as that. We're now, and this is why companies like the tech giants have been able to move so quickly, or the recent IPOs and so on, is because they figured out how to adapt to the market, because software is easier to change than the building.
Right.
And then the really cool thing with manufacturing right now is actually applying software to what's inside the building, as you just mentioned. But that's really it, is that if you really master software, you're actually able to change the factory itself.
Amazing. So for those listening right now and thinking, wow, I need to maybe start thinking about implementing some of these ideas, but let's say they are in a team that is mostly project oriented or not even at that point yet, what do you think would be the first steps to take here?
So right now, I would just say, go to Google for project to product. You can see the website. There's some materials there. But I think, the main thing is check out the book. If you like the ideas, just get in touch. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter as Mik Kersten. And yeah, we've got, there's a number of things that myself, my organization can do to help, but there are a lot of materials out there as well. So I think if you're in a digital or software organization, the nature of project management will change. And I'm hoping that the book will give you some inspiration on how to stay ahead of that change.
Perfect. And I'll have links to all of these in the show notes for this episode. And so Mik, thank you so much for your time. This has been a fascinating conversation, and there's just so much more to explore. So I'd really recommend everybody listening right now to go and pick up a copy of the book, which you can find at Project to Product, and also in the show notes for today's episode. And I'll share the link to that in a moment. Mik, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Cesar.
Thank you for listening to the PM for the Masses podcast.
Tune in next week for more great ideas on how to manage your projects better and truly stand out in your industry.
PMforthemasses.com